Three, two, one. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Let's do it. It's go time.
And the outro fades like that. And it's a great evening here in Berlin. It's just finally nice warm weather. And I'm very happy to welcome my co host, John. Hi.
Hi, Natalie. How are you?
Good. I hope you're also doing well.
A little tired, but I think that's to be expected with a newborn in the house.
Congratulations for that. It's crazy.
Oh, thanks.
um, we are joined today by a crew of Caddy people, Matt and Mohammed. So Matt is the author of the Caddy web server, and you're working on it full time, relying completely on sponsorships. And Mohammed is a product manager by day and a Go For It student by night, and also the creator of Caddy SSH. Hi, where are you joining us from?
Joining from Saudi Arabia.
Must be
I'm
super late for you.
and I'm joining
Yep.
from Utah.
Fun. So we're kind of like across all so many different time zones. It's always fun to have those shows. The benefit of the internet. um, so tell us a little bit about yourselves, and your intro question will be not an animal that starts with the first letter of your name, but when did you start using Go?
Mohammed, you go first.
Okay. Um, I started playing sometime in 2014. So in 2013, I was doing a program of networks and system administration. I was chatting with a friend who's a software engineer, and he kept telling me, like, there's a new language called Go by Google, and it returns the error, so you're forced to deal with it. You never forget it. And in 2014, web dev job as my full time that we were using, and I was so much annoyed by Java that I decided to this new language my friend has been bugging me about, and I got hooked since then.
Very cool. Yeah, I started writing Go probably about 10 years ago now, 10 or 11 years ago, right around Go 1. And yeah, because our company was a .NET shop, and we were looking at easier to deploy, faster alternatives, and just kind of a more fun language overall. And so then I started using it we wrote a couple products in it, and then I started using it for personal projects and including a web server. So that's how that all started.
What was the web server that you were using at work back at the time?
It was a mix of Nginx or Apache, whichever had better copy-paste examples. I could never figure Apache out, at least.
Yeah, lots of, but also Nginx was not very straightforward without those examples. I would say, at least for me.
My experience with both of those has been you figure out enough to get whatever you need done, and then like you forget about it in 6 months, so then you have to figure it all out again. So like nobody really understands it; they just learn enough to do what they need to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts too. I found myself setting up like 4 or 5 different components just to get a basic website up and running. So I wanted to kind of simplify things.
So it's pretty much like
That is
the XKDC comic of Git, except it's now web servers. All of the
Yeah,
friend who
I
knows how to
suppose so.
configure it.
Yeah.
I wonder if these days, Matt, you're making it worse because anymore most of the people I like talk with are using Caddy. So finding people who know how to use Nginx and Apache is like going to become a rarity. And when you've got a company relying on it, that could be a problem.
I don't see that as a problem.
Well, it could be a problem for that company for a short period at least.
Could be. We are encouraging all companies to switch to Caddy. So
So, I guess we can jump into the Caddy stuff then, because I think, Natalie, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the goal is to talk a little bit about Caddy and then start talking about this project Mohammed's working on as well and go in a little more depth there.
Yeah, definitely. And for those who are less familiar, for the two people who are listening and are slightly less familiar with Caddy, so far, those people figured out that we're talking about a web server. But what is special about that web server, unlike Nginx and friends?
well, you'll find that it comes with all the benefits of a Go program. So it's easy to deploy, and it has no external dependencies. And it has memory safety, which you don't get from C servers like Apache, Nginx, and Envoy. And with Caddy 2, we have made it kind of a very powerful platform on which you can deploy your Go services, and you can extend it. It's pretty much infinitely extensible, and so it's not like writing some Lua code or like some little scripting thing that's interpreted. It's you compile in your Go code and natively, and so you're getting like native CPU instructions for your extensions, and so there's a ton of benefits there. And probably the thing that people mostly talk about when they think about what's special about Caddy is that it uses HTTPS by default. So it's the only server that does that automatically and by default without needing any config. It will just try and make TLS work for your site and manage that all automatically.
See, I can say for myself that was pretty much the original draw to Caddy was you want to set up some sort of HTTPS and setting it up in other places has always historically been a pain in the butt. I remember like the first time I had to get a certificate, and I was probably a teenager at the time, and it was one of those things where like trying to do that while not having the money to really want to do it for a side project was like a nightmare for the longest time. So seeing things like Let's Encrypt, or is it Zero SSL? Is that one of the other ones? There's a bunch of them out there. Like seeing different companies like that are offering like much easier options out of the box has been pretty awesome. All right, so Matt, Caddy is written in Go entirely. Is that correct?
Yep, pure Go.
Okay. And Mohammed, you, I believe, wrote an extension. So Matt was saying that it's extensible. Can you verify that that's easy to do? Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Oh, it made my life a lot simpler. So I only had to focus on the logic of the SSH server as session management, the PTY and all of that. And because I didn't need to write any of the logic for the listeners and the reload management and the config management loading and all of that stuff. It was all handled by Caddy, and I on my own project.
You said that you're a gopher in the evenings, and by day you are a project manager. So why going on a web server as a fun project? Was that a need? Was that just something fun that you found?
Yeah, isn't really is not into the software development side of things. It's still to tech. I'm a product manager of the payment gateway at a local bank. So I didn't get to practice programming day by day. And programming at night in the is basically my stress relief.
And from all the projects, web server is the interesting one.
Well, Caddy was fun enough and interesting and easy to contribute to. There are a lot of sides and angles that you can nibble at. And at the whenever I started getting involved, Caddy version 2 was still being released. It was still in the beta phases. So there were a lot of angles that I managed to look at and work on. So it was kind of, let's say, a ramp to get on.
So it's interesting that you said that it was easy to get involved in and easy to contribute to. So that sounds like a fun place for starters. Can you tell a little bit more about this for people who want to get involved and are not sure how to start, where to start, what makes starting easy?
There are a lot of sides that can be looked at, and the architecture of Caddy is it's cleared well enough that if you're looking at a certain handler, for example, most likely you don't need to look anywhere else besides that particular package or one or two files that you need to look at. And depending on what area you will find something to work. If you want to work on the CLI, if you want to work on the config loading and reloading and the config structure itself, the configuration files, it's all there. If you want to write a handler that simplifies lives of particular process in the web server, some of those, there's a ton of things that are in there. You want to look at PKI, it's in there. And it's the nature of projects. There are fractal nature. There are so many things that you can, and you'll always find something that's either good first issue or something that knowledge about project itself, its architecture, or the Go runtime. If you can go again, that will be perhaps a bit challenging. If you want to fruits, it's all in there. For example, one of the first things I worked on was basically looking at the warnings or the messages GoLint was giving, GoLint CI, and it was basically saying change the order of these fields in the struct to make it more compact, and stuff like that. So it was easy to get into the project and more about it as I worked on it more and more, picking up stuff like that. And I think there are hanging fruit for other beginners or fresh contributors who want to look at. You can basically fire up the project on VS Code and run the linter or any of the available linter, whether go lint or whatever, and find some areas to fix. A few in the issue list that can be looked at.
Yeah, I might also jump in and say it's you can learn a lot from hacking on Caddy, but it might not be the best project for like absolute beginners if you're absolutely new to Go or absolutely new to open source. Just because of its sheer size, there's a lot of packages and different pieces. So it might be a little overwhelming if you're brand new. But if you're experienced with Go and or experienced with open source, it's a lot easier to kind of work through that feedback cycle. So Mohammed's been, from the beginning, has been awesome about like optimizations and little like nuanced things that I never thought to figure out. So that was really cool.
Is it complicated to write such an extension? How much time would you say such a project will take? Or it depends if the extension would be complicated or simple.
I guess Mohammed could answer too. He's probably written more like third-party extensions than I have. But I think it depends. If it's a simple extension, some extensions are just a couple lines of code. Others are thousands of lines. Just depends what they do. I imagine Mohammed's SSH server, I think it took 2 years to put that together. That's a huge app module.
Well, the 2 years is because my time is divided between work, school, and this side project, plus other my personal. And this is why it took such a stretch. It shouldn't have taken 2 years, honestly.
So when you're talking about these extensions, like I assume with Caddy, based on my knowledge of it, like it's a server where you start it up and you provide it like a config file, and it sets up a server in some way based on that. So whether it's grabbing a certificate for your domain and reverse proxying it to something on localhost or something like that. When you build an extension, like what exactly is that doing? Is that giving it new config variables that it can then take and do stuff with, or is it something else aside from that?
Yeah. So at its core, all Caddy knows how to do is there's like 4 keys in its config. There's like admin, logs, storage, and apps. And all it knows how to do is set up admin and logs, like logging, so you can see output. And then storage and apps are all modular. They're all extensible. So apps, Caddy expects apps to fulfill an interface that have a start and stop method. And that's it. So it just calls start in all the apps when a config is loaded and calls stop when it's unloaded. Beyond that, it's up to the app module to do its job. So the HTTP server has a start function, and when it's called, that's when it starts its engine, so to speak, and starts serving your site. And then when it's stopped, it shuts down gracefully. And so Caddy doesn't know anything about HTTP really. And so that's why you see now. I don't know if this is clear to the listeners yet, but the implication with Mohammed's work with Caddy SSH is that you can now deploy a Caddy instance that does all that you need to do with one unified configuration. So you need to run an HTTPS server. You put that in your config. You need a memory safe SSH server. You put that in your config. And you just deploy this one binary that's static and has no dependencies, and is memory safe and such, and takes care of all the TLS for you. Obviously, SSH doesn't necessarily use TLS, but the idea is that it's kind of your one-stop shop for memory safe static deployments.
So, Mohammed, if I were to install your Caddy SSH extension and to run it, this would allow me to SSH into like the server that's running Caddy, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay. And the idea was to give it, useful defaults and things like that, so that people setting this up are less likely to make mistakes that are, I assume, pretty common when setting things up like that.
Yeah, especially with the SSH, because over the years, the 90s, and the defaults have been changing and improving over time, but we have so many blogs and tutorials written that were probably written for the early 2000s, while we are here in 2022, and SHA-1 isn't safe anymore, and RSA, you need to have a minimum of 2048 bits and so on. And at the same time, you find those tutorials or blog posts saying, well, generate an RSA 1024-bit key, and you should be all right to use with your SSH server. And the goal is just like Caddy now is working with safe defaults for TLS and HTTPS connections, and have modern representation or defaults for the we'll do the same for the SSH server. So one of the things that I had is, or I made sure to implement, is the keys that are generated automatically, they follow the modern recommendation. For example, if the key available, the minimum one will be generated automatically for you, and it will be 4096. The other key that's automatically generated is the ECDSA. The regular DSA isn't generated, and so on. All of that is written in the comments in the docs.
So getting into this, I assume that this means you had to actually like learn about all of the like proper ways to do things now versus the past. And you had mentioned that reading blogs, like sometimes you find blogs that were written in 2000 when security practices might be a little bit different. Have you like would you have any advice to people, or like how did you go about managing that process of trying to figure out if what you're reading is actually up to date and like accurate versus, you know, understanding what current practices are versus like, oh, this is an old practice, I shouldn't be doing that?
One. One of the things that that's an easy one to look at. Look at when was it published. If it is, cross it out. Look for something more recent. And I know I'm not a cryptographer. I'm gonna admit this, but I know from a few reading, curves is a bit. It's a bit controversial, probably, and if you know better, you might correct. But at the same time, there is this for it, and this is why one of the defaults that I opted for is to have elliptic curve DSA. The same thing for DSA. We know from recent findings and the RSA 1024 isn't safe anymore, so higher bits and so on. It's more of following the recommendations of non-cryptographers. For example, I remember reading some of the stuff I've came across, and it was a few blog posts by Matthew Green. I don't remember exactly the titles, but was part of. I went through and I found which algorithms should I use and which not.
So when you're going through these algorithms, has Go been a language where you found a lot of them have already implemented for you, or have you had to like go and try to implement some of these on your own?
I never needed to implement any of those on my own, which is delightful. Go had everything, battery included. Things that's are already available is the ed 25519. That was already in there. It's part of. I just had to only grab it from, generate the keys with it. Same for all of them. The crypto package of the Go standard library is for my needs.
So other than SSH, what and cryptography, what else? What other skills did you pick up in this project? I guess writing documentation.
So your voice is cutting.
Oh, I'm sorry. So one of the skills you picked up in this project is cryptography. And is there any other interesting skill that you picked up along the way?
I had to learn a lot about that's a bit a ton of stuff that I had to go through for Unix systems or for Windows, especially on the Windows side, because I have the PTY interface and then they developed the CompTY interface, but so I had to wade through all the Windows provided DLLs and so on. So definitely PTY was a really interesting area to work on and learn about.
I'm glad you did that because I don't even really want to go there. Sounds kind of gnarly.
Oh, it is. It's funny because here we are. We have the basic kind on are almost always virtual machines. Yet we're still SSHing to a server. The other side, and the name still implies it. It says teletype at sudo tel, and it will tell you, or you will tell it. You will tell the server, here are my, and give me the text or the based on those screen dimensions. And when you change the window, your SSH client will tell the server, okay, these are the new dimensions of height. Now resize everything and give me back the response. Because we don't really, the remote machine isn't really connected to a screen. It's emulated down. And it all goes back to, I think, 60s or the 50s, whenever they had actual teletypes connected to the actual hardware. Actually had to tell it, yes, I have a screen of this particular size, and you have to redraw everything to that size. But now here we are in 2002, and we still have to deal with all of that because, hey, we are emulating everything down to the pixel because we have legacy.
I was just looking at the list of modules. If you go to the Caddy download page or the modules page, and you look at the SSH app that that you wrote, it registers a lot of plugins or modules. I see SSH, actors, actor matchers, ask, lots of ask and authentication, different providers and flows, config, loaders and matchers, session authorizers, signers, even SFTP subsystem, it looks like. This is pretty thorough. What can you do? What can you do with this exactly?
So the actors are equivalent to handlers in HTTP. And the actor matchers are analogous to the match in the HTTP app. And this way you can...
So, oh, yeah, no, sorry, continue.
So just like you can define multiple possible actions or handlers for a particular, based on certain criteria, now you can use the matchers to match user John, then run this actor. And if it's user Natalie, run this other actor. And if it's Matt, just, sorry, shut it out.
This is cool. So you can kind of compose your own SSH logic with JSON in a memory-safe SSH server. And it looks like you have two actors so far, a shell and a static response. So you can start a shell for the user who logged in, or just write a static, like a string, basically, to the user. And it's cool. So you can match on various SSH connection properties like user, their IP address, their group, their protocol extensions, their critical options in the certificate or the user. Like, this is really neat.
There are a few enhancements. Sorry, for the shell actions that have been working on locally. There are certain areas or gaps in the implementation that picked up and fixed locally, and I haven't pushed yet because C is in the way. So the shell needs a lot of enhancements. There are a lot of acts that could be implemented. Perhaps proxy. It takes a bit of creativity. Shell and static response were the least creative things, and they were probably the mostly used functionalities out there, and this is why them.
I could see this being extended to use to implement like custom like SSH apps. I've seen kind of a resurgence lately in like graphical SSH based applications, and I could see this being a good platform to launch and deploy those. So you can deploy your website, but you can also deploy like an SSH app. So if users SSH into it, you can have this nice TTY. That's really cool. It's retro, but it's cool.
Yeah, I think one of the ones I saw recently was by Charm, I think was the company. They had like
Yeah.
a self-hosted Git server that like
Yeah.
made it look all pretty and stuff when you SSH'd in. But every time I see one of those, I just think that like that's its own style of programming, making something like look good in the terminal and like doing all that stuff. Like Mohammed, you had said you had to figure all that out, and like I feel like that's a skill that if somebody asked your average developer to go build that right now, they would need some sort of reference material because it's just not something people do as much anymore.
Making anything look pretty is difficult and takes a skill.
That's true. So, Mohammed, you've spent, it sounds like 2 years. Granted, it was a part-time project working on this, and it's a massive extension. If somebody was going to get started building like an extension for Caddy or getting involved in that sort of thing, do you have any recommendations for them that you've learned throughout the whole process, or is there, have there been things that you wish were different?
Um, there are there are four basic concepts that you need to look at, and if you're implementing a module for Caddy, 99% of the time, well, percent of the time, you're implementing an interface, and you're registering your module as part of a namespace where Caddy can find it and load it up. So find exactly, I would say, find exactly where within Caddy do you want to add which particular functionality or namespace are you looking at. Is it a listener wrapper? Is it a handler? Is it connection policy? And then find the interface they need to implement for that area and start from there. You can start small, then add more features into it. And I admit this is pretty much a generic advice for all projects, but this is what it is like for Caddy. And you need to look at how your config structure is gonna look like. So consider how would you like your JSON configuration to look like, and move. And this was the only part, or the difficult part for me to work on. Which shape of JSON structure of the configuration is the nicest to work with, or the one that makes most sense? Once you figure your
I wrestled
JSON
with
out,
that too.
everything is easy.
Yeah, I think when I first started writing Caddy too, the first 3 or 4 months was just me going back and forth on what the JSON should look like. So Caddy's native config structure is JSON, but most people will use the Caddy file for ease of use. But we actually have quite a few users who do use the JSON because you can program it, you can automate things a little easier. You can generate everything compiles down to JSON. You can always output JSON. You can ingest JSON everywhere. It's very ubiquitous. And so we actually do have a lot of like business users in the JSON. So that might be helpful if you want to contribute, is knowing that like your native config, what that looks like, and kind of getting that right, because that'll impact a lot of future capabilities as well.
Matt, I think you had said that pretty much everything inside of Caddy is essentially a module that's running. Am I recalling that correctly?
Yeah, everything except for its core like module loading and logging and its core API and such. Yeah.
So are there anything like any of those like built-in extensions that would be worth checking out for somebody who's like just getting started versus like the ones that are a lot more complex?
Yeah, I would check out extensions that are or modules that are like what you want to build. So if you want to build an HTTP handler that handles requests, then you should look at HTTP handlers. A simple one is like the static response handler, where you just hard code a response. That's a pretty good one. Or if you want to write an app, the HTTP app is pretty complex. The TLS app might be a little better. There's also the PKI app. That's even simpler. So you could, just look at the kind of module that you want to implement. And we have documentation pages explaining what the different kinds of modules are and kind of how that works. And so, yeah.
John, you asked Mohammed what is his tip for people who want to start, and Mohammed, you gave a very good answer of start something small and kind of build on top of that. Don't make that too complex. And is that a place where your experience as a project manager kicked in, that you kind of guided yourself through that and structured this in a very good way?
Sorry, was that for me? Voice drop.
Yes. Sorry. Do you feel that your experience as a product manager helped you start in an organized way? And if yes, if you found something that works well in your team at work and you took with you to building this, what are some tips that you can share?
Yeah, it's been really a great feedback loop. At my job as a product manager, I have to fix something or develop something in a certain manner for customers, and I know the product is going to be large, so I have to structure it in a way where it is extensible and easier to implement new functionalities that will not make it breaking change for the customers. And at the same time, in my project, I have something similar where I the only difference is the product I have is something I inherited. Here, I have something that I have to develop from scratch. This
Which
is
do you
where
prefer?
developing from scratch, it's
Mhm.
100 times easier than inheriting something and I have to fix it. There's a lot. Yeah, because when you have something, you have a legacy and you have thousands of customers already using it, and there is this edge case that more, and it's really a painful corner that you need to fix, and it cannot be fixed in a way that's not backwards compatible. It cannot be fixed in a way that's backwards compatible. And now either I have to live with it and kind of add top of band-aids as we go on,
Mhm.
or I have to do the breaking change and go through the pain of migrating or teaching thousands of customers how to follow. And if it's a breaking change, all of those customers yelling at you over emails on phone calls, and with that, I find developing something from scratch is way better. The difference, the way it is, for me as a product manager, one of the things I took upon myself, client support at one point in time, and then I shifted to product management. And what is I do every day, and I sit with the frontline support team and I ask them for feedback. What about? And when I started working on the SSH app, I had similar perspective to that. Like, I'm gonna structure this app in a way that will be used in critical areas. Now I need it to be done in a way where the support is easy, the customer onboarding be nice and simple and straightforward, and it should be intuitive.
Mhm.
Is where I had to take on the support hat and the frontline. What is gonna be a stress, stress point for them, and how around that. I don't know if that makes
This is
sense
an
or not.
interesting answer. It makes a lot of sense, and it also makes me think about people who take the path from project or product management into developer, because you hear a lot about people going from software into product management. But I have to say, I personally know less people who took this path. But it sounds like this gives you such a toolbox that you wouldn't have otherwise. So that's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, I think more software should be written like that, like with that approach.
I think in general, there's a lot of people who get into software development and like, I don't know how to describe this. It's almost like they view things like this is the way it should be for good software, and they ignore the fact that there are real business needs that need to be achieved and like things that need to be maintained. And I think it takes, especially like new grads who are going into software, it takes them a little bit to realize that like there is a business the business actually matters more than like the actual software being the prettiest thing in the world. So being a project manager probably like makes that very clear. Like the only thing that matters is my project moving forward. Whereas a software developer, I know some software developers that could probably sit there rewriting the same application for like 6 years trying to like make it perfect. I think we're getting close to unpopular opinion time.
Is that your unpopular opinion?
This is me. I have a question for Matt when it comes to that.
Right.
I have a lot of unpopular opinions.
Well, are you ready to jump into that, Natalie?
I'm pressing on it. I always find interesting ways of breaking the recording, the software. So looks like this time we're gonna have to
I think I've had
pretend
that
that
issue
Matt
with
is
the
here
soundboard
and
too.
singing. Ta-da-da-da! Popular opinion. And this is where Matt says, "I really think you should leave by now." Okay, this was the tune. So, gentlemen, what is the unpopular opinion that you brought on board?
Mine is that vanilla JS is enough for anyone.
Okay.
Do you mean like modern vanilla JS?
Yeah, of course. But I'm writing a kind of a front end app in my spare time right now, and there definitely like are a few little pain points, but it's kind of like those pain points in Go where you just write a less function or something like that. So you do that in JavaScript. In vanilla JavaScript, it's such a like the traditional way of building web applications. It just runs so fast compared to, and it's way less clunky than like a lot of modern ones. With just kind of a plain stack, nothing fancy. So
I kind of wonder if half that issue stems from the fact that for the longest time, vanilla JS was very hard to use, by itself at least. And like I agree with you that it's gotten way better to the point that if somebody started over, I'd be like, you can start with vanilla JS. But I don't know if I'd use it to build an entire front end or not. I haven't tried recently, so I can't really speak to like what that feels like. But I can definitely say that I understand why people are like in the mindset of that's the way we do it.
yeah, I mean, maybe there's a place for frameworks, but I'm not even using jQuery this time, and it's really been a breeze putting this together. And I understand what's going on. The DOM is a weird place, and there are definitely quirks, JavaScriptisms that are just a little strange. You got to read some documentation carefully, or you get bit pretty hard. But if you I mean, it's just I have full control over things that are going on. I know exactly the performance of something. I have a very good grasp of it, just because it's bare browser, so to speak. So that's mine.
I'll just say that there already one disagreement showed up on Slack, so kudos.
Oh,
There will be a survey afterwards on Twitter, and see how that predicts the outcome.
Yeah.
Mohammed, how about you?
All right. Mine is Microsoft Excel is a net negative in this world.
No caveats
Okay.
at all. Can you elaborate?
I've seen coworkers spending countless hours trying to figure out some weird issue Excel is doing, and it's just a waste of time. When I come out to help them, what I do is I take their Excel file, convert it to CSV, run it through SQLite, and do whatever, generate whatever information or value generate, and then take that output into Excel. And most of the time, whatever you're doing in Excel, be a lot easier if you just, and it's easy to learn. I can teach some business people how to use SQL. Learn that, use SQLite. There are some DB browser, there is tons out there. And just throw it in the bin, have no regrets. If you need...
So you're talking about spreadsheets in general?
Yeah. Spreadsheets in
So like
general.
Google Sheets and yeah.
That would be a question of mine.
If
so,
you're
yeah.
in need for some database or something,
Honestly,
reach out for SharePoint. Use whatever. There are tons of alternatives.
I mostly agree, I think. So
I like mostly agree, but then I guess the hard part there, and this is like kind of like Mohammed's saying, like we need to educate people on using SQL, which I think would be great if people understood basic ways to like do queries or even just like simple ways to automate things. It'd be great to see like a generation of kids growing up knowing how to at least write a little script, because I've definitely seen people sit on a spreadsheet doing things that they're like manually typing in, that it's like you should not be manually typing in that stuff or trying to do what you're doing. But on the other side, I think there's just a whole generation of people working that are just not going to learn something new. And that puts us in a weird spot of like, how do you keep that still going while the other is like needs something better?
Tools like Copilot just write SQL for you.
I don't know if I'd trust You're talking about like the AI code
the
stuff?
GitHub autocomplete thing, yeah.
I don't know if I'd trust that fully to write all my queries, but that'd be interesting to try though.
Yeah.
I guess it's hard for me too, because I use spreadsheets for like simple stuff all the time, where I just don't want to code and it's just real quick to throw something. Now, granted, most of my spreadsheets are like throwaway spreadsheets of like throwing a couple things in here real quickly, doing some calculations, and it's like a calculator almost.
I'm kind of the same way. I use it like a disposable calculator, simple stuff. But if I start looking up formulas, I'm switching to SQLite.
Well,
So
we
maybe
also
that's-
have a rank of the top 3 unpopular opinion, and the top 3 unpopular opinion, which is kind of popular opinion. So looks like we have a candidate for each from this episode.
That's fun.
So Matt, I have another question for you.
Oh no.
How often do you get grief over using the init function for your modules or for your extensions?
More than once. More than once. The counter argument from those people is that the importing package, so the Caddy like main, should be calling, not only importing but also calling the register module function. I don't really see the point in that though. I feel like if you're importing it, you want to plug it in.
I'm not like saying one thing one way or the other. I laughed at like you go to the documentation and like the third line in the or extending Caddy quick start is a func in it, and I'm like, I feel like this right here has got to lead to a lot of hate mail of some sort. Although, I mean, given your use case, I personally don't know a much better option for what you're doing, where you need a bunch of things imported and built with it.
I mean, it's either the 2 lines of code that you add to, well, more than that, you'd have to import the package, and then you'd have to know all the module types in that package and call a register module yourself. I don't think that's necessary. Like, I think if you're using a package that has n number of modules, just plug them in. Like, they're already there. So, but yeah, I've heard that. I think Caddy has some other unpopular design decisions that I still stand by for the most part. Some of them especially so. Like, some people still don't love the JSON thing, but the JSON thing is wonderful and you don't have to use it. So
we could just make a list of unpopular Caddy opinions.
Yeah, to be fair, the number of unpopular Caddy opinions has come down recently. Like since Caddy 2, I think Caddy's been a little more on the popular side overall. There's definitely still some debates and some things I don't think there are good answers to. But I don't know. Come at me. We'll see. We can talk about things.
I mean, I think what you're saying is like, to me at least, I view what you're doing is you're trying to choose like the lesser of two evils, essentially, of like ways to approach a problem, and it is a tough one with the extension, because making an application, I don't think many people have actually written software that needs to be extensible, especially to like build with other code, and that's like a very unique problem to solve, I think.
Yeah.
I think Mark Bates has done it with Buffalo stuff before, but that's like one of the few people I know that's even like gone into that realm at all. Most projects I just don't think support it. They just be like, these are the modules we have. If you want others, good luck.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sometimes there is still some debate over Caddy's module like design in terms of the fact that they have to be compiled in. Some people kind of hate that, but a lot of people love it, and it has a lot of advantages. So, I don't know.
Well, what would the alternative be? Having like a second server running that it communicates with?
Yeah, so there's a couple options. You could do like some sort of RPC thing, or like inter-process communication, so IPC. But that has performance penalties because you're going through the kernel. If you could embed like a scripting language and have some sort of interpreter. There's a few Go interpreters out there, or like interpreters written in Go for various languages like Lua or Go actually, and probably some other languages as well like Starlark and such. But then you don't know your code is broken until it comes to you at runtime, and so it's like, I don't know, it just made more sense. Just compile the code, get native performance, ship a static binary. Don't worry about it. Like, you don't want to be messing with things in production anyway. So,
yeah, I don't think that's an easy one to come up with a perfect solution for, I guess.
There isn't one, but it's a pretty good one.
Because I'm thinking of like VS Code, where like every extension's JavaScript, but like then there's the fact that it's not that JavaScript is terribly inefficient or anything, but it's definitely not going to be as performant as other languages in most cases. So like you have that limitation when you're setting up things. VS Code doesn't seem to have it quite as bad, but I know with Atom, that was one of the issues with that editor, was that because it was JavaScript, there were definitely times where coming from like Sublime Text, it felt slower.
Yeah.
And I think part of that was because they wanted something extensible, and Sublime Text, it was extensible, but it was Python, and it was a little bit harder to do, if I recall correctly.
There is one more really maybe unpopular decision that I'm like lukewarm about, and that is that you can't set like a global config in the Caddy file. You can't say like give one line of configuration there and have it apply to the whole config to all your sites. automatically. We have snippets, so you can put it in a snippet and then import it into each of your sites, but you still have to put that import line. Some people want the Caddy file to work like cascading style sheets, but if you've ever written CSS, you'll know why I don't love that idea. So anyway, that's all I can think of.
Cool. To finish, I'll say that the show notes have the links to extending Caddy and also to the Caddy SSH extension by Mohammed. And we will also include the XKCD that you mentioned in the very beginning. And yeah, thanks everyone who joined and listened and responded in the chat. And thank you, Mohammed and Matt, for joining. And we'll wish everyone good rest of your day, whatever time it is. Let's see if the outro works now.
Thanks.
It does not work. So let's pretend there's music now.